Tesla earnings, Elon's master plan part 2 is going, well, as planned. Again, this was voted up by our panel here in our group chat. Last time we covered Tesla was episode 164, early February, after a Delaware judge voided Elon's pay package. Since then, Tesla has made some giant moves. They launched FSD 12. I've been using it. It's pretty great. Also, they cut the price of FSD by 1/3 from $12K to $8K. I think you can also get it for $100 a month. And they announced a 10% RIF, going to cut 14,000 employees. Always painful to do that. They're looking to reincorporate in Texas, leaving Delaware for obvious reasons. Earlier this week, Tesla shares were down more than 40% year to date, mostly due to a decrease in demand for EVs. Market caps dropped from $750 billion to $460 billion. Shares jumped 12% when they reported Q1 earnings on Tuesday. Investors got excited after Elon announced that Tesla's new line of models could start production at the end of the year or maybe even early 2025. He shared some thoughts on the robo-taxi or cyber cab, which he talked about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and he has had in the master plan for a long time. Chamath, you made some great calls on Tesla and made some great trades there back in the day. Your thoughts on Tesla in 2024?
Sharps love it. This is another one, Sharps versus the Squares. Why did the Sharps love it? Why did it go up and everybody was so confused? And I think the answer is that he's actually executing exactly to plan. And so if you're investing in a stock, what you really want is a CEO to kind of stick to a plan that is well known. So we don't have to actually guess what the plan is because he puts it out on the website. Look at the master plan part 2. And if you start reading down, everything that he said he's going to do starting in 2016 is basically what it is. So let's take the first part, right? What did he say in the first part? He said, hey, listen, guys, this is 2016. We're going to build a Model 3. We're going to build a compact SUV, the Model Y. We're going to build a new kind of pickup truck. Okay, check, check, and check. Then he said, oh, by the way, we're also probably going to have to do a heavy duty truck and a high passenger density urban transport vehicle. So that's the robo-taxi thing that he's going to announce in August. Okay, check and check. And then he talks about the software and the investment in FSD and trying to get to a place where, you can just have a much higher probability that it will save you from an accident and it'll keep you safe when you're driving your car, which will be a large driver of why people want to buy the cars themselves. And you can see like these FSD models. So if you're a smart capital allocator, what you actually saw was a dislocated stock price. What you saw was a plan that by and large, he's been executing on at a strategic level. Underneath, there's the vicissitudes. What are the vicissitudes? Sometimes you overhire. You need to trim some fat. Sometimes you overspend on CapEx. Now, he spent about $1 billion of CapEx this quarter on AI infrastructure, so H100s for training. But the market saw through it because that was a reasonable amount of money to spend on training for FSD, right? So you can start to see the tale of these two reactions. The Sharps looked at the capital allocation and said, okay, you missed by $2.5 billion this quarter, but that's going to create a buying opportunity because we think it's roughly mispriced. And we think it's mispriced because going back to this plan from 2016, this is all the things that we've been underwriting from $40 billion of market cap to 750, and now we're getting a 40% discount to buy back in. So I think it's a really interesting moment to just contrast and compare what Sharps look at and then what the media breathlessly exaggerates. And I think what they wanted was to lionize the Meta earnings story, but the Sharps rejected it. And they wanted to dump on Elon, and the Sharps rejected that in size in both cases. And it's just a reminder to all of us, be very careful what you're reading. Because if you just took the headlines, you would have expected the two reactions to be exactly opposite. But when you vote with money, it's very clear and unambiguous because you actually move in the direction of accuracy. And that's what the stock market allows you to see. And I think this is a really interesting contrast and compare of Sharps versus Squares here.
Yeah. Just well recapped. For those who don't know, Sharps in gambling are people like Haralabab, friend of the pod, who are just the sharpest bettors in gambling. Vicissitude, that's an unpleasant change in circumstances for those of you who don't know the word. Sachs, I don't know if you want to comment. I mean, you and I are biased in this with the relationship with Elon. Any thoughts on Chamath's take?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the stock per se. I mean, Tesla's products are amazing. They seem to be really executing well there. And I think that Elon foreshadowed on that earnings call what's coming in the future. I'm personally really curious about the Optimus robot. I mean, that has the potential to create an entirely new market and bring about something that we've only seen in science fiction. So to me, that's very interesting. I think in terms of the company's problems, I think they're mostly dealing with some macro forces. So first of all, the GDP growth rate has slowed to 1.6% in Q1. So this just came out. And that was a notable slowdown relative to expectations. So first of all, you're dealing with the slowing economy, it seems like. Second, high interest rates mean that car payments are higher. If you want to finance the purchase of a car, your car payments is going to be a lot higher when interest rates are above 5%. And I think that has been a pretty big headwind for Tesla and really all the car companies over the last year or so. But I would say that I think both of those things are ultimately cyclical, and what matters is Tesla's products. I would say the only issue they have that's a real long-term issue is just the Chinese competition. Companies like BDY are ramping up production of knockoff products at low prices. And so managing the competition with China is probably the only one of these issues that's, I think, probably a long-term issue for them to deal with.
Let me ask a question here. How do you rank these businesses? Energy, Optimus, trucking, ride sharing. Energy, Optimus, the robot, trucking, ride hailing. Rank those, your number 1 or 2 in terms of potential for Tesla Chamath. Around the horn.
It's a good question. Ride sharing
Is number 1.
The absolute, probably by an order of magnitude. And
interesting.
the reason I say that is in order for ride sharing and ride hailing to really work the way that they envision it, you will have level 5 autonomy supported in jurisdictions where, again, if you just look at Part 2, the whole point is you can summon a car from your app, and if you don't have access to a mobile phone, you can go to these bus stop equivalents and just press a button and the car comes to you. And so in that world, there's just so much value add in terms of passenger safety and sustainability for the environment and less traffic. It's a gargantuan game changer. Meanwhile,
what's your number 2?
Just to contrast, Uber and Lyft seemingly are profitable because they find pricing power to raise prices. So if Tesla enters in as a third player in that field and just guts pricing, which I think would make sense for them to do, I think this thing is just gangbusters nuclear.
That's a really interesting point.
What do you got, Sachs? Going around the horn here.
Well, I already said Optimus, but that's based on a long-term view.
Yeah, this is a long-term question. Based on the long term, 1 and 2.
In the long term, in terms of option value, I am the most intrigued by the robot play. And Elon has pointed out that once you have robots that are capable of doing lots of different jobs, pretty much any job you point them at, that we could have more robots on Earth than humans. So it's a big future market.
So you got Optimus number 1, and who's number 2?
I agree with Chamath in the short term that ride sharing could really reach its logical conclusion with robo-taxis. Remember when Uber first gained steam and people were speculating about how big the market could be, there was a lot of giddy talk about how car ownership would change and you wouldn't need to buy a car anymore because you would just use Uber all the time.
We called it going full Uber. Yeah.
And I went full Uber, or I shouldn't say full. I went mostly Uber, within a couple of years of discovering
you were one of the
that
first,
product. Yeah. So I thought the potential was there, but the problem is it was just too expensive. I mean, Uber is still quite expensive, and the most expensive piece of it is the human driving the car. It's all that labor cost. So if you're able to charge for the ride purely based on fractionalizing the CapEx, and that CapEx isn't even that high because they're making these robo-taxis pretty cheaply now. And you're able to get so much more utilization out of a car.
Exactly.
Right? Because, how many hours a day do you drive your own car? Like an hour, maybe?
Less.
But a robo-taxi...
90%, I think, is the number on average that they're not used. Freeberg, who's your 1 and 2?
I think the Optimus has the highest alpha, but the highest beta. So, more upside than anything else. Just unclear how you get there, what the path is and the capital requirements. And I think there's going to be a lot of commoditization in this space. But the ride sharing is built in, it's low beta and significant alpha. So
you're 1 and 2 Optimus rideshare.
yeah, Optimus rideshare.
Chamath, what was your number 2 again? Just so I can recap here.
I would actually probably pick energy.
And why would you pick energy as your number 2 after ride hailing?
I think it's a pretty obvious disruption so today in America, if you look at the energy infrastructure, the utilities keep raising rates. And they keep raising rates independent of what it costs to generate energy. There are 1,700 utilities in America. They are, by law, obligated to spend, I think in the next 10 years, about $2 trillion on CapEx. They will pass all of those costs, plus a margin, to consumers, even though in these next 10 years, the cost of generating an incremental unit of energy will be essentially free. So I think the very disruptive play is to take 100 million homes and make them mini utilities.
Say more.
And
what does it mean, make them utilities? Yeah.
you go to a website. Again, the biggest investment I've made is in a company called Palmetto. They are close to now the largest residential solar business in the United States, if not the largest already. Now, what do they do? You're a consumer. You can go and lease or buy. It doesn't really matter. And we give you a super cheap system that goes on top of your roof, plus a battery system. And all of a sudden, you're totally resilient and independent of the utilities. And we help change the laws so that every time you have excess energy, you can put it back into the grid and get paid, which is called net metering. So if you have 100 million of these mini utilities competing against 1,700 incumbents that are forced to make huge investments and are mispriced, that's an upheaval of an enormous amount of market cap, but also an enormous amount of debt. There's like trillions of dollars of debt. So I've always thought a ginormous directional bet to make would be to go long the disruptor. The person that helps arm the rebels in this case would be the person that arms 100 million homes. And then eventually at some point just short the debt of these utilities because they won't be able to service them if enough people quit and don't need PG&E and everybody else. It'll be just massively, massively disruptive. So that's why I think that market could be big. I like the Optimus market. The only thing that I'll say is in my experience, when I've looked at these generalized robots, the conclusion that I came to, and I could be totally wrong, is I suspect instead of having a generalized robot, you have very specific use case robots that look differently. So for example, there's an example, Nick, you can throw a picture, but there's something called Intuitive Surgical, which is essentially a robot that operates on you. And if you look at that, it doesn't look anything like what you would think a robot would look like. It just looks like a ginormous machine. And so I suspect that there will be people that become experts in these vertical use cases, and that will limit the TAM for a generalized approach. I could be totally wrong, but that's sort of why I rank them the way I rank them. But I'm pretty convinced that robotaxis are number one, and then this energy thing that upends these 1,700 utilities in America is number two.
All right, Jay Cal, you were the third investor in Uber. Are you worried about your investment? As I understand it, you still haven't sold, have you?
I've sold slightly more than the majority of my holdings over the years, 2 private transactions, and then I held everything post going public. And I'm still long Uber. I give number 1 to Optimus by far and away, because I think the build of materials on Optimus could be 10K or less. I looked at some of these other startups that are in the space, and I've been studying it a little bit just out of curiosity. And so at a 10K bomb, I think they could rent you one of these for $300 a month or something like that, a subscription. I think every human on planet Earth eventually will have a robot. So I know that's crazy, but I think Optimus will dwarf the entirety of Tesla's other businesses. Number 2 is energy, clearly. I think, and number 3 is ride hailing. Number 2, energy, fairly obvious what's happening here. If you look at what's happening with data centers, it spiked, I think, from like 3 or 4% of energy now to like, is it 15%, Chamath? I think we had a discussion with Phil Deutsch.
It's almost I think it's 18%. It's almost 20%. It's a huge number now.
Okay, so we
Huge.
dovetail the two stories together. These H100s are beasts, cooling beasts. This is like, you can't even, Phil Deutsch was telling us in the group chat, like you can't even cool some of these places. And what that means is there's going to be demand for energy. To Chamath's point, if each home becomes a little provider, it's going to create some regulation change, I believe. I'm no expert on the regulations. We should definitely have Deutsch on the pod at some point to talk about this. But imagine these, like in Texas, they keep having the grids go down. And in Australia, they have the grids go down. It's going to be so annoying for consumers to have the grids go down while demand spikes for data centers. All the regulations are going to get opened up to put batteries and solar everywhere.
It's also dangerous. I mean, people die when these blackouts and outages occur. And also, like we saw in San Carlos here in the Bay Area, nat gas lines explode. PG&E is responsible for forest fires. I mean, if you can do your part to basically get off these grids, use somebody like Palmetto or somebody else and just get solar, Tesla, and be done with it. And at least you're not contributing to some of these downstream errors.
Yeah. And so I agree 100%. And by the way, if you can make money from your solar and your batteries and somebody else picks up the cost of installation, I think there's some arbitrage here, Chamath, to be had. And I think that's like what you discovered when you did your first principle approach to this. So I think those two businesses will be far bigger than anything else they're doing. Now, on ride hailing, I'm using FSD 12. I have been using Autopilot. I was one of the first users of Autopilot, from the beginning, like literally. And FSD 12 is a significant improvement. That being said, all of these systems work really well in a controlled grid, like we've seen with Waymo in Arizona and in, limited parts of Los Angeles and San Francisco. I think that vision is 5, 6, 7 years out from having low single-digit percentages. And you may have seen Uber has incorporated Waymo and the taxis in London into their system. I think Uber's ultimately going to be the place people go to call up one of 20 different self-driving. I think a lot of people are going to get there at the same time. Wouldn't be surprised if Elon gets there first. But I think that's 5 or 10 years out, if I'm being totally honest, in terms of getting to scale. So I would never, ever bet against Elon seeing what he's done.
Wait a second. When are you saying that self-driving will be good enough to power just one robo-taxi? Let's just forget about the scale. Just like, when will it be good enough to have like a steering wheel free car?
Yeah. So if you can just look at Cruise and Waymo and you can have your answer, which is today in a contained environment with remote drivers intervening on some regular basis, it works. So people are taking Waymo, San Francisco, LA on a pretty regular basis. Cruise, I think, got kicked out of San Francisco. But if in the Cruise data, there was a lot of interventions going on. I suspect Waymo's doing a lot of interventions. So I think...
I don't want to be a proponent of this, by the way, but bleep out his name, was saying that, Jason, with FSD, they're very strict that you have to be holding the steering wheel and stuff.
Yes.
But you can go to Alibaba and buy something that hacks that, right?
It's a weight. A lot of
I'm
people
not
are
promoting
doing
that.
this.
I'm not promoting this.
No.
I'm not promoting this. I'm just saying that it does
So anyway,
exist.
to answer your question, Sachs, I think today, or let's just say by the end of this year, an FSD 12 could be operating in a constrained space just like Waymo is. Now, to get it to all regions, back roads, weather, there's a lot of edge cases here. So I think the more important question is, when can automated be 5% of rides or 10% of rides? And I think that's 5 or 10 years from now. I do think a couple of people will reach that moment at the same time.
Well, let me show you a video. This is one of my coworkers at Kraft took this. This wasn't me, but he was riding in the back of one of these robo-taxis. I think this is San Francisco or New York. I'm not sure which one.
Mm-hmm.
But there is no one in the driver's seat.
Yeah,
Jesus.
But there's a safety driver watching this remote, I believe, which is what Cruise was doing. And then when they get to a point where they can't figure it out, the human comes in, intervenes.
I don't see a safety driver. Where's the safety driver?
No, a remote safety driver.
Remote. But I have to say, watching this video, that is the coolest bloody thing. I mean,
yeah,
this is amazing. I'll be
I
honest.
think it's I think it's underrated in terms
Me
of how
too.
significant this is going to be.
me too.
Yeah.
I
And
totally
look,
agree
if
with you.
this is a Jaguar, look at that. It's a Jaguar.
Yeah,
So you're telling me that Tesla's not going to have something at least as good as this
better.
soon?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I think they have it already. If you drive FSD 12, I believe FSD 12 probably could be working today in San Francisco under a controlled grid with the remote drivers like the other people have. If somebody knows about this, by the way, can they send us information? I'm Jason at calicanis.com for life. Just send me a picture. I'll keep it on the DL. I won't reveal sources of who these remote drivers are, what their setup looks like. I'm very curious to understand how the remote drivers work for Waymo and Cruise.
Can they park the car?
They can take the car with a joystick, is my understanding, and move it around a garbage can in the middle of the street, Jamal.
Wow.
And that might be the future of this. Like, let's say 10 or 15%. Let's say 10% of the time it needs an intervention. 1 an hour, 2 an hour. Having some remote person in Manila, wherever, watching 10 videos concurrently and looking for moments to do this.
It's incredible.
Cruise workers intervened to help the company's cars every 2.5 to 5 miles, according to a New York Times article. All right, and just if we score everybody's rating here, I give 2 points for first place, 1 point for second place. Optimists got 6 points, ride-hailing 4, energy 2, trucking 0. There you have it, folks. There's your scores from the besties.
What is Waymo? What is that? Is that like Uber
That's
and Lyft?
Google self-driving. They spun it out.
But what is it? Is it like a
LiDAR,
service?
$150,000 cars.
Uh-huh.
And,
But it competes with Cruise?
yeah, they're doing what Cruise did.
It was the original self-driving car company that Google
Yeah.
set up, and then they set up Google X around it, and
Just explain to me the market, guys. I'm not sure I get it. So there's Waymo and
it's
Cruise.
Uber. Yeah.
But there's Waymo and Cruise, which are like, there's no drivers. And then there's Uber and Lyft, where there are drivers.
Yeah,
That's the basic, right? Is that?
Yeah.
That's right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And there's also Aurora. I don't know if Uber owns a percentage of that or not, but I think you know about Aurora.
Aurora was set up by Chris Urmson. He was the original engineering lead on Waymo inside of Google. When they did a management changeover, there was a big falling out. A lot of people ended up leaving the Waymo program. Chris left, took a bunch of people with him, and started Aurora, which was basically software to do autonomous driving that they were then going to license into OEMs. So that company got backed by a bunch of VCs and ended up going public via SPAC, and it's publicly traded today.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
Uber owns 26% of Aurora, or actually now it's down to 20%. There's also Zoox.
They made an investment in it. Yeah.
There's also Zoox, which is part of Amazon. So I think there's about 10 people who are going to get to the finish line at the same time. I think it's going to be a very crowded space.
But again, some of these guys are trying to make software for OEMs so that the
Yes.
OEMs don't have to build their own autonomous platform.
Mhm.
And some of them are trying to make a driving service like Waymo. And then some of them are like Tesla has a driving car. They actually sell cars. So different models.
Yeah.
But
See,
they're all going to converge. Yeah.
I actually disagree that there's going to be 20 or 30 of these because I actually think that self-driving is really, really hard. And we know that Tesla has been spending years getting to this point, and then Google as well. So I'm not sure why there'd be more than 2 or 3 companies that can do
well,
self-driving.
there are 10 or more pursuing it. I do agree it goes down to 4 or 5. And then it's a question of is it a winner take all, winner take most? And that's what remains to be seen.
But I mean, you need a ton of data to make it work, and you
Yep.
need a lot of data around edge cases. And so the advantage Tesla has is they
Yeah,
actually
have
have
so
real
many cars on the road. Yeah.
They have real cars on the road with real driver minutes and with drivers using the previous version of FSD and making interventions. So they're constantly getting better. I think Google seems to be putting enough resources into this to get somewhere, but I don't think a lot of companies are going to figure this out. I think it's going to be somewhere between 1 and 3 companies figure this out.
Well, Waymo has the most on the road right now. I think Cruise is second to them in terms of in market. So the question is, how quickly can Elon get this out?
Have you guys, any of you guys taken one of these robo taxis?
I haven't taken one.
No,
Waymo's
that's one of my
open.
coworkers.
We got to do
Freeberg,
that.
have
Yeah.
you taken one?
Yeah, they're cool. They just move around.
You did take one.
Like, yeah, they're all over the city. You can take them in San Francisco now.
You have to download the Waymo app?
Yeah, and there's like a wait list, and then you get on it, and they're letting people on, and then you just get on it and go for a ride. Pretty cool.
By the way, someone tweeted something kind of funny. They said, it took Uber, years and years and like $1 trillion to finally get to profitability. And now they're about to get disrupted by robo-taxis. This is brutal.
Unlikely. I think unlikely. I think it's going to be a very slow rollout, 1 or 2% a year. So, but it compounds. And so we'll see.